Okay, so it's not happening now, Barry, because of contract issues. But let's assume that eventually happens. Tyson Fury versus AJ.
I think Eddie said he thought he could do him in 9. What do you think? You have an honest prediction of what you think?
I want to know what
happen?
you think, man.
Yeah, I know. I mean, when I talk, I just give you an honest appraisal. I think Tyson Fury is a very difficult fighter with his head movement. I don't think he has much power for a man of his size. I think if Joshua fights his own fight without getting brought into the Tyson Fury antics, I think Joshua knocks him out pretty straightforward whenever he hits him. And I guess I think it's earlier than 9. Because I think Joshua has the power to take people out. Although, Tyson Fury, he's a great fighter. Let's not knock it. This is an interesting clash of styles, but I think Joshua's power will prevail 4 or 5 rounds.
Do you have to say that because you're his promoter?
Don't have to say anything. I just say what's the truth,
Yeah, I hear that.
I'm too old to tell lies, because you can't. When you're old, you can't remember the lies, so you get yourself in trouble. So you have to tell the truth. So with me, it just comes off the top of my head. And listen, I've been wrong plenty of times. 1957, I had a bad day, I remember, but most of the time I get it right.
You said I was listening to an interview that you did where you said sometimes your relationship changes with the fighters when they lose. And did it change with Joshua at all after the Andy Ruiz fight?
Interestingly, not at all, which was amazing. Normally, everyone's human. When you lose a fight, especially if you're undefeated, you're looking for someone to blame, or it's not your fault.
Yeah.
This is a very strange guy, Anthony Joshua. What you see is, good-looking guy, very articulate, great fighter. But behind that, there's an enormous amount of character in him, which I find very interesting, because when you're in the trenches, you've got to look beyond just what you see. You have to look in the heart, in the soul,
Yeah.
And that's when you find out what and who you're actually dealing with. And Joshua, after he put his hands up and just said, I wasn't good enough. I got caught. I don't know what happened. I've got to go back to the drawing board and work. He's an exceptional character, not just an exceptional fighter. That's all I tell you. And for that reason, he looks at Tyson Fury and works out a way, because he knows his strengths and he knows his weaknesses. He said to me the other day, that Tyson Fury is hilarious. He said, he is a character. He's so entertaining.
For sure.
He said, I can't compete. I can't compete with that. He just does things that I wouldn't do and says things I wouldn't say. So I'm just going to concentrate on letting him be the entertainer, and then I'm going to close the show.
Yeah. That's cool.
And I think, I think from a product marketing perspective, it probably will work really well. Everyone needs a protagonist and a defendant. And Fury walks around like he's his own boxing promoter, right? He does all his own conversations, revs everyone. He's like a white Ali. So it doesn't require. It doesn't require Joshua to do anything. The mystique builds with Joshua because he says less.
Morecambe and Wise, you go through all the great comedy duos of all time. Usually one was a straight man and one was the one that delivered the killer line. That's how, and this is entertainment. And Tyson Fury is a fantastic entertainer. He is amazing. But when someone's that good, at entertaining, don't compete with him on that level.
Sure.
Because he'll kill you. He has the words, he has the charisma, he has the humour. So don't compete, because you're gonna get murdered, aren't you? You're gonna get verbally murdered. So what we do is we say, well, when all that stops, when the bell goes, in the loneliest part of the world, the four-cornered ring, there's no more entertainment other than two men finding out who's the best. And we'll see. But the fact that we're talking about it, the fact that there's conjecture, the fact that the bookmakers, some of them make Tyson Fury favourite, can you believe, I think just adds to the dynamic and the involvement of all of us in this show.
Sure.
Because we've all got opinions, and until the bell goes, whether it's Barry Hearn or whether it's Martin Warner or the great Jack Jones, we're not going to know the answer. We can just speculate.
Do you ever wish that Tyson was on your books?
I'm sure he will eventually. They all come to the end, so they come to the great. To be honest with you, Jack, and it's a conversation I've never had, Jack. But I tell you this: if I was a fighter, and I'm just being independent, who would I want to be? Seriously, would I want to be with the best in the world, or would I want to be someone who just gets by?
Of course,
we all want to be with the best. We want to be with us. People want to work for Matchroom Sport. They know we're the best at what we do in different sports, and people have dreams. If I was in anything, I want to play with the best. I want to live with the best. I want to marvel at their skills. I want to learn. And that's why I don't think there's a fighter in the world in his inner psyche that doesn't say to himself, "I wish I was with Eddie. I mean, I'm getting on okay. I'm getting a living. I'm doing all right." But there's that little bit of magic. You look at the Canelo-Alvarez fight. Now, there's a good example. Canelo is one of the great, great fighters of all time, without a doubt. Absolutely tough to work out how you could ever beat him. He's a great fighter. He's been there for a long time. He's been managed by Oscar De La Hoya. He's had all that. And suddenly he sees, and which he can't believe, by the way, and this is a very intelligent boy, suddenly he's part of this unbelievable journey with Eddie, with crowds that he's never seen, with entrances he's never seen, with respect he's never seen. And he turns around and goes, "What have I been doing all my career? Why haven't I had this from day one?" And that goes down if you're a 6-rounder or 4-rounder. You just turn pro. What's your dream? Of course you want to be a champion. But there's a bigger dream. I want to be with Matchroom. I want to be one of their stars. Yeah. Because I know they get a load of money. I know they get the fame and fortune. They get the exposure. They're treated with enormous respect because of what they do. Why wouldn't I want to be there?
Do you feel like after where Matchroom gets so big, do you think that quality of service isn't going to be the same for every fighter the more you take on?
Jax. You're not, in the words of Muhammad Ali, you're not as dumb as you look. Right? That is a great question.
Thank you, mate.
That is a great
Can I work
question.
for Matchroom?
You're getting close, Jax. It's one of those things that you have to actually work on that. When you get big, sometimes you forget where you come from. Sometimes you forget the people that help you to get there. And that's something you've got to work on all the time so it doesn't happen because it's a sin. So you're right. We have to have the same level of enthusiasm for a 4-rounder who's just joined as a world champion. And that's a statement of who we are, where we come from and how we run our business. And it is a problem as you get bigger because you've only got 24 hours in a day, and you get fighters say, Billy Joe Saunders said before the Canelo fight, Eddie spends more time with Canelo than he does with me. It is a problem. You have to try and balance it and be fair, and everyone has to understand that this is a tough little balancing act to have. But as you get bigger, you mustn't lose the reason you got big in the first place.
I'm sure Martin's got a question after that because that talks a little bit about how you build in a business, isn't it?
Oh, I've got lots of questions. I mean, but I think one of them in particular is that in figurehead businesses, like what you did, Barry, and now what Eddie's doing, it's like the great businesses have the spearheads that can go and talk and say, look, right now I've got to go on TV, or I'm going to go and do this podcast, or right now we're going to break this press announcement. And then boom, they go on to Canelo. They're not to Joshua. They're not to someone else and whatever. But it's that machine underneath that has to drive the program and the promotion where it doesn't require the management to be doing it, right? Because you can only whip people so fast. It comes back to the efficiency of the model and what you want to get out of the people. And then that gets even more complex when you add calendar dates and you start to say, I'm in fishing, bowling, cricket, whatever, snooker, you're in so many different things. And then another problem is you become the Man City. Like you go and put on a Superdome bloody payday that's in the hundreds of millions, which is obviously a feather in the cap for Matchroom, for Eddie, for Joshua, for you, for bringing him along. And then you got to say you got someone how do you then say, well, don't worry, We're going to bring in 3 new guys. You're starting right from the beginning. You're at the bottom of the pyramid. They're a million miles from getting a $200 million, payday. It's a complex beast. There's a lot to consider.
It's it's not a problem. It's an Max. It's an evolution, right? And it does come down to the people, the guy holding the
sure.
chip, when you're small, like Jack says, it's not a problem being in control and having your own personally. You're actually promoting your own personality. I think for 20 years I never listened to anybody. For 20 years I wasn't big enough that I needed to. I knew what I wanted to do. I just did it and did what I had to do to get the job done. As the business develops, so do the people, and so do your own role. And you have to be a big enough person to look in the mirror a lot and say, I'm not really good at that, so this person's better. And you mustn't have the ego that says you are the know-all of, you're the font of all knowledge. So it's about building teams. And this is why it took me a few years to this. I mean, I'm 73 in June. It took me a few years to think about my own personal evolution. And that was easier because I built people, young people from within my world that had come up through the ranks that not only knew my personal ethos about what my values are in life, but added their own individual piece of stardust to it as well. And you have to identify those. You have to back them. You have to, it's a bit like having an extended family. You may have adopted a few children as well as had a few children, but they all become your children, And then you get to the stage where in today's changing world, life gets more complicated. When Sky launched in 1990 was a massive change in my life, but the changes through digital applications now, from Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, wherever, they're massive. And a younger brain does pick on those much better than someone who can be stuck. My own personal evolution is now not at the speed that it needs to be to run this monster of a business. So I have to trust people. I do, we historically have never really brought in senior management, Martin. We've always grown them from early doors, so they understand the rules. And the rules are easy. This is a 7-day job. It's 24 hours a day. You have to give your heart and soul to it. If you're not prepared to sacrifice, please, that's okay. You'll have a decent job, but you'll never be a superstar. There's a price to pay, and it takes time to find those people. And I found them, and I've got the best units I've seen, and I've got, fortunately, a young man who grew up at my feet, understood, had passion, understood the law of telling the truth, be straight, don't let anyone take liberties with you, but at the same time, don't look for aggravation. Just get the job done to the best. Be the best you can be. It's the only message, because I'm no genius. Be the best you can be. And generally, that's good enough. But as business gets bigger, as Jack said, it gets more complicated. We're up to 650, probably 700 event days next year. We're operating all over the world. We're producing amazing shows. And yet every day we're thinking, what's next? What else? How can I be better? So, that is an evolutionary problem, which is only solved by great management.
Yeah.
Aside from like the work ethic and commitment that you bring, and you talk about, the 7-day work week, and I know myself about the sacrifices you have to make, and so does Martin. What other skills would you say were important that you brought to the sports promotion business?
I always like razzmatazz. I always wanted to be heavyweight champion of the world. And I found out I couldn't really fight that good. So, that was another career path blocked. And after a while, because I loved sport, all competitive sport, it evolved into me being, when Anthony Joshua first signed for us, quite a suspicious young man because he's quite intelligent. And at the end of our discussions, he just won the Olympics. And he looked at me and he said, what do you really want out of me?
Nice.
What do I mean to you? You've got, he's smart. He said, you've got everything. You got all the money. What do you really want from me? And I said, Anthony, I want 1% of your adrenaline. That's my
That's
life.
good answer.
1% of your adrenaline. I said, when you walk into the ring at Madison Square Gardens, Wembley, I said, the buzz I get, I can't buy. I can buy anything I like. I've been successful, but I can't buy adrenaline. That has to come from within. And that's what I get every day. I get every day from my business, whether, I've got the World Cup of Pool going on at the moment, I'm glued to it. I can't wait for Fishermania in July. Oh, and in between, maybe we'll see some great fights from Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury. You don't have levels. And it's not monetary related. It's adrenaline related.
Yeah, yeah, that's the
That's the
thrill.
key issue. What's right? I ask myself what's right. Early doors, I didn't. Early doors, I wanted to make a living. I didn't ask what's right sometimes, but I do
Yeah.
now.
Moving on to your like the 50 years in the business and the way you've diversified, and you can answer this personally or on behalf of Matchroom. It all comes back to you. What were the really big highlights for your career in terms of any of the sports? What kind of really stands out?
I've always been a lucky face. I think that's the real. Things have happened, and I mean, I'm fairly, obviously, I'm Christian based, so I do believe in
Yeah,
greater movement
Yeah.
out there. Faith
sure.
is a big part. I've been smiled on. When my mum told me to be a chartered accountant, and no one disagreed with my mum, so I did.
That was it.
And she said, "Work hard,"
Yeah.
so I did. Uh, and I think women are the only things that really women are the only things that frighten me in my life. My mum and my wife are the two most frightening people I've ever met, and I've met a few people. It's just hilarious looking back
Not
on
any
it.
boxers.
No. There's a few of them. What's interesting was, the birth of Sky in 1990 was a fundamental changing point. I was a sports promoter with very little airtime, and suddenly this Sky came along and changed my life. I mean, go back before that, 81, when Steve Davis won his first world championship was a life changing moment. I suddenly had, not just a mouth, but I could back it up with
Yeah.
talent.
Yep.
I had the best player in the world. So that was fundamental. And these changes, they go on all the time, small and big. When you actually look back and say, why did I do that? When Lennox Lewis was fighting, I think it was Andrew Galata in Atlantic City, the fight ended early and I went in a casino and saw a queue and they were playing poker and I'd never played poker. I joined the queue. English people love the queue. I thought, this is a good game. This should do well on television. Went back to Sky and the next thing you know, I'm the biggest poker producer and promoter in the world and made a shed load of money. But I think I've just always been shy. Touch wood, I've always been smiled on from upstairs, and he'll tell me when I've had my time, and I'll accept that. But in the meantime, I'm having a frigging ball, mate. I'm having a ball. It just things seem to work out. I don't know whether the good guys sometimes do win in those westerns, don't they?
But you started out by owning fruit machines and jukeboxes across East London, right?
It was one of the businesses I did. I mean, I was a totally legitimate chartered accountant. I built up a little private practice. I worked for one of the big accountancy firms. I think I was their youngest ever manager. But in those days, where I came from, Jax, you didn't. The world's been full of prejudices for many years. This is nothing new, And one of the prejudices when I was growing up was because I didn't speak particularly well. I didn't go to university. My dad didn't. My dad was a bus driver. He didn't have any money. My mum cleaned houses. So it was tough to get on that ladder, as it is today for other people in different environments. Nothing new. Eventually we get it right, hopefully. But then there'll be another problem coming up, I don't know when we're going to say anyone who's left-handed is a poorer citizen. The whole thing is ridiculous because it doesn't. Common sense tells you we're all the same. So forget all that. But in those days, it was a struggle to come out, and I got my chance, and I took it, and I took it in a very aggressive manner.
Yeah.
It's just down to hard work. Just treat us, as I say, just treat everybody the same, and let's make ability the only criteria for success. Ability, sacrifice.
How did you like is that even in boxing? I'm surprised to hear that you're saying the way you spoke was something that you felt wasn't an asset at the time. And when even speaking to you now, you're such a big character and obviously clearly someone that's still in touch with where they came from. Was that such a big issue even in boxing? And then how did you traverse that? Did you feel like you had to change it?
No, but boxing wasn't a problem. I'm talking about when I first started and I wanted to be an accountant. It was another world from where I came from. When I went back into working class, where I'm most comfortable, I'm working class, I'll never be anything different. But I feel comfortable amongst boxers, against darts players, against snooker players, because they're me, aren't they? They're I suppose really a psychiatrist would say that they're what you wanted to be really, but you weren't good enough. So what I did was take a step back and say, I want to be involved. So what do I bring to the table? Well, I bring creativity to the table. I bring, the ability to make sure that I'm the best at monetarising sport, I think. But I also believe in sharing that monetarisation. I don't believe in just keeping it to myself, because you don't grow anything. So I went more onto entertainment values and how I can make these people characters, how you can identify, how people can associate with them, and make everybody part of this soap opera of sport. Tyson Fury is a great example of the villain, if you like, the villain of the piece. And Steve Davis was the boring one that always won. They had a character, people could associate with that, and that made it more showbiz. And then you add in the walk-ons and the music and all that, and you create an adventure when you buy a ticket.
Yeah. I'm interested, Barry, what goes into, well, two questions. What's common about sports promotion as it relates to different sports? Like, do you have to change the hype machine, the process, the build up, the way you negotiate, all these different elements that you have to pull together? And perhaps the great example, I think, 20 years later you got into boxing. I know you were a fanatic, but how is boxing different to, say, cricket or snooker? And what does what goes into a decision for you to walk into a whole different market and say, I'm going to promote this sport, I'm going to find talent, and I'm going to market it?
It's a good question.
Yeah, it is. I mean, yeah, it's a complicated question as well, because every market's different, every sport's different, in the same way as every individual's different, and you have to have the ability to think on your feet, and you have to have the ability to be creative in different environments. So it's a bit like an analysis. People don't realise that the work that goes in behind the scenes before you come out and say, I've had this great idea. I remember walking into the Circus Tavern darts final as a guest, and someone said, what do you think of it? And it was seedy, it was people having a beer, having a bet. And I went, I can smell the money. I have this ability to go into environments, and it works both ways. But I have this ability to go into an environment and see commercialisation that other people haven't seen. And that's made me fairly unique. And there are times I go into an environment and I say, not for me, because if I don't have a passion for the sport in my life, you can imagine, 73 or getting old, got enough money. Why would you do any job just to make a few more quid? The answer is no, because the biggest asset we've got is time. So when I look at different sports, I mean, I'm not a motorsport fan, for example. It doesn't mean to say that they're not brilliant athletes, that they're not sensationally brave people. It just don't turn me on. So if it don't turn me on, I ain't going anywhere near it. And and people have said to me, well, you can do this and this and this and make millions of pounds doing that. And I said, yeah, I know, but I'd probably rather go fishing, and what I'm going to do is be honest with myself as well as other people. But there is a changing philosophy at every level on the technical side, Martin, when you negotiate, when you evaluate, when you exploit. There are different rules that apply to different sports and different people, and you have to be on top of that to make sure you can adjust your technique, because it is a technique for negotiation, commercialization, and expansion. But it all revolves around selling the dream. Whether you're selling the dream to the athlete, the talent, whether you're selling the dream to a sponsor, to a television company, but most important, are you selling the dream to the punter? Because we found out during COVID, take away live crowds, we lose atmosphere. You can create as much artificial noise as you like. It's not the same. When you turn up the ramp, That's when people get value for money. Now, the principle of all business is the old Rockefeller saying that everyone has to end up with a piece of bread in their mouth following negotiations. Key to all business is thinking poor and giving people value for money. And included in that conversation, by the way, is me. I don't need to make money, but I love making money. Why is that? Because I'm playing a game, playing a sport. The same, I'm playing to win. It doesn't matter anything else. If I'm not playing to win, it's not competitive, I'm out because it's not fun. So change your tactics at every level, evaluate and be honest with yourself and be prepared to walk away.
I love that.
Another way of looking at it is because I'm fascinated. Obviously, I've built a few businesses in my time and scaled them up and sold them and done all this stuff. And I know how brutal that process can be. And I look at what you've done with Matchroom in an area where it's full of personalities. Like it just seems to me to be a very difficult business. And I guess I keep coming back to what the is standard in this? Like, what's the standard? Like, how did you maintain and grow so big? And so the question I'd come back to for you is that if you had to have one thing other than negotiation, because you're clearly gifted at assessing people and finding out what their motivation is, but is there one thing that's common across these platforms that you had to get right in order to get Matchroom to grow? Because it feels to me like, it's like a pack of cards. One bad deal and it could have ruined your opportunities in snooker or in boxing. But in fact, you've gone from strength to strength and just added more sports industries.
I think the key for us has always been, on the technical basis, the key has always been ownership. If you... there are certain sports you can own. There's other sports you can be a major player in, but you never own them. So you never own boxing, but you can be a major player in boxing. And Eddie will get as close to anyone could get in ownership in boxing over the next few years. He will develop boxing into the UFC. He will become the UFC of boxing. I mean, I know he's got plans already. I think Matchroom Mexico starts in a few weeks' time. Matchroom Australia's coming, Matchroom Scandinavia. But you can't control it because there'll always be some kid turning up in Peru who can fight. That's okay. There'll be someone who wants to be a boxing promoter. That's okay. It's like saying, there'll always be a Tesco's, but there's going to be shops on the corner for some local services. That's all right. There's different levels.
Yeah.
Other sports you can own, and my key objective has always been to own the sport. So things like snooker and darts, for example, where I own the sport, gives me the opportunity to plan properly the long term without individual selfish appraisal, i.e. players generally, who really will run a business for what suits them. I run a business for what suits the sport or the business, in the knowledge that my own business must be profitable for it to be sustainable. In other words, during COVID, look what we've done during COVID. It's been unbelievable. We've done more events during COVID than we did in the normal year. And simply because we had the reserves, we had the enthusiasm, and we also had the passion to provide work for people that were self-employed that could work. If we didn't do an event, they didn't get paid. Who feeds their children? So it's a question of the old-fashioned technique of we owe them, they owe us, and somehow we're going to get there together. It's quite refreshing, and COVID has taught us a lot, and our businesses and our attitude will change. The key principle, if you really want to exploit properly, is you have to have ownership, which is why agents don't work. Agents are short-term fixes, they get a percentage, they might do a job for you, but they're off, What we do is you hit the nail on the head, Mike. You've done businesses yourself that you've spun them off and you've sold them and you've done things. See, we don't. We're here, and we're here for ever, And God help anyone who comes across us, because we are relentless. We are relentless in making sure that we will do the job we can do the best, and we will provide and we will grow because we're doing it for the right reasons. Along the way, we'll also make a lot of money. But that, making money is not difficult. Making money is relatively easy. It's what you do with it and it's how you get there is what matters. Yeah. I think we'll get there the right way. And certain sports, not all of them, will benefit from it, and we will change people's lives by doing it like that. And that's
talking about doing what's right for a sport. what was your reaction to the news of the European Super League and obviously the questions that were raised about the actions of like wealthy football club owners? I know you will have some opinions about that.
Unbelievable.
It's shocking, right?
Yeah,
Unbelievable. I mean, I would be so embarrassed. I would be so embarrassed if I was part of that European Super League to get it that wrong, to get it so far out
It's
of
hysterical.
reality. They they must be sitting in a toilet somewhere saying, "I don't want to go outside." It's schoolboy amateurism. Absolutely. They never thought it through. They just saw money. They saw greed. Money, money, money. Go get money. And yet, we used to say, I mean, I had Leynorin for 19 years, right? But they used to say the chairman leaves his brain in the car park. These guys had no brain. Had no brain. It's hilarious. They're billionaires. We think they're smart.
Yeah. What?
Numpties. Absolute numpties. How can they get it so wrong? They didn't understand the basic rule of business. And they're all smart people. The basic rule of business is understand your customer. Understand your customer. And they didn't understand. It can take some time. You never own a football club. You become a custodian of that football club. And unless
Good
you
point.
take that principle at heart, you'll never make the right decisions. And these guys from their ivory towers looking at a few billions to add to their billions, they just missed the plot. And by doing so, they've made themselves look ridiculous.
Well, funny. It's funny, really, because I think that ultimately history will just probably gloss over this piece of that was going on. But it's interesting. You're right. They didn't understand their customer, but they didn't understand the competitor threats either, right? I mean, you've got an association, you've got grassroots football. They just went it all. they didn't think about it. So I mean, it's unreal that you would think the managing director of Chelsea and all these clubs would have better sense to advise the owners than to let them. It's just pure blind greed, you know?
I can understand it from the owner's perspective to an extent. Listen, I bought a business. I don't give a about it. I just want to make as much money. I understand that. It's okay, like it or not. But the actual management, not to stand up and say, boss, this is a disaster. And by the way, this won't work, but it also may have major repercussions. Because what it's done, it's alerted the proletariat to the risk and damage available by the king of the castles, if you like, the Premier League owners. This will probably bring in government intervention, legal intervention to make sure it doesn't happen again. And this is something the Premier League have never wanted. They've never wanted an ombudsman or something like that, government intervention. They may get it now because everyone's gone, hang on a second, we thought these guys were going to be good for the game. Actually, they're disastrous for the game. We can't give them this much power over our national sport. And it may have repercussions in that manner, which will have long term. At the moment, they're all backpedaling, aren't they? Oh, we're ever so sorry we got it wrong. Let's give you a year off season ticket increases. But no, the damage has been done now because people have seen these people for what they really are, which is it's okay. I'm not knocking them for that. All I'm saying is it doesn't fit into the psyche of what is football is beyond a sport. It's a national occupation. It's a national involvement. It breaks the rules. It breaks the boundaries. So you've got to listen. And the fans this time and the authorities and the government suddenly went, oh, are they that type of people? Well, in that case, we'll have to do something to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that'll be the long-term damage for what was one of the most stupid, reckless, unbelievably inefficient, chaotic plans I could ever see in my life.
I'm with you.
Embarrassing.
Jumping back into boxing and talking of, I would consider this controversial, where you're moving towards like celebrity bounce, like KSI versus Logan Paul, or later this year you got Eddie Hall taking on former two world's strongest men. Is that good for boxing? Or is it a business opportunity?
It's a business opportunity without doubt. It's only happening because of the money. But in a way, if it brings more people into some form of sport following or pugilistic entertainment, when Eddie did Logan Paul and KSI, I was like, What are we doing this for? Now it makes a load of money, by the way. That's okay. And KSI Logan Paul make a load of money, and people bought tickets, enjoyed it. But what I'm saying is, we mustn't sit on an ivory tower and be the anoraks of all anorak sports. We must watch the world evolve commercially and physically, and we must watch sports evolve in the same way. And if it means, look, if they did these shows and no one bought them on pay-per-view or no one turned up and bought a ticket, the shows wouldn't happen. So therefore, there's a demand. Where there's a demand, we come back to the football argument. You have to listen to your target market and you have to act accordingly. I believe if it's handled properly, I wouldn't want to see it on every week because I think it's boring. But it actually can, in the same way as UFC has grown at the expense of boxing, because they listen to their target market. They listen to what the kids wanted. They put it on. This is another example you mustn't ignore. You must learn from. And that means that when you come to professional boxing, let's make sure there's no mismatches. Let's make sure that their big fights happen, because then you're fulfilling the demands of your target market in the same way as these other people are, and everyone's a winner.
It's interesting when you talk about listening to the world and not being an anorak. The fact is, you have to listen to survive as well as grow, right? Because what you want is when the Logan Pauls turn up and all the rest of it cares, you want to say, me, that's a spectacle entertainment. It's this kind of thing, and it's got this kind of customer. And you know what? We're going to make sure that doesn't dilute traditional mainstream boxing. That's a very different thing. And you want both, right? You want to, if there's an audience and a market, you want both. But what you don't want to do is cannibalize, the opportunity and have this different thing. And I think UFC has done an incredible job of creating a different market for something that people clearly have got. It's not, I'm a boxing guy. I still watch a bit of UFC, but I'm always going to be a boxing guy. My question to you, Barry, is that has it diluted boxing? Obviously, it stole some attention, but it is a different market. And have you thought about getting into it? Obviously, it's dominated by some key characters, but you must have considered it.
Yeah. I think Eddie's talked to Dana White quite a lot about it. I think the two of them are two sort of monsters in there, gorillas in the room, aren't they? Those two. And you can imagine Dana White thinking, I don't want him in UFC. And Eddie's thinking, I don't want Dana White in boxing. So, you never know. But I just think you mustn't set. The world is such a strange place and things change so quite fast. You mustn't set anything in tight principles. You have to be prepared for the unexpected. You have to expect the unexpected.
Sure.
So, if you talk about UFC, when it first started, the traditional boxing fans were dismissive, but the guys in charge of boxing didn't recognise there was a new audience that was going to relate to that. Similarly now with these celebrity fights, there is an audience for it. So you can't knock it. You can't criticise it, because it's obviously it's been spoken to with demand. A few years ago, I'm an anorak as well, by the way. I'm an old traditionalist, and I'm getting better at it. But I didn't like particularly women's boxing. I looked at women's boxing and thought, no, I really couldn't do this. I actually staged a few women's fights 10 or 12 years ago in Poland and places like that, and they were well received. What Eddie's done with women's boxing is all of a sudden they're massive superstars, aren't they? So who's right and who's wrong? People lie. Numbers don't lie. If the ratings are good, if the sponsor demand's good, if the ticket sales are good, it means there's a demand there and you have to embrace it. You either embrace it or you get out. And if you want to stick in the mud and be one of those old-fashioned, no, this is the way my dad and my granddad did it, then you will go out of business eventually. And actually, to be honest, as quick as possible, please. Because we need creativity, we need innovation.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, you got to move with the times.
You've got to move.
When you think about boxing overall, I'm so romantic about the Muhammad Ali days and some of the great fights, and we've seen some big things in boxing. How do you think boxing's changed? Is it still the same sport as it was, in the 60s, 70s, the 90s, the Tysons, even Lennox Lewis?
The key issue on sport generally, and boxing in particular, is that the talent has become much more important and has to be listened to. in other words, and this is certainly true of boxing, is fighters used to work for promoters. Today, without question of doubt, promoters work for fighters. So this is a massive swing. And alongside that swing, and probably partially responsible for it, is with the commercialization has changed with pay-per-view. You know, in the old days when you'd sign a fighter up on a 10-fight deal, they're gone. They're gone. And quite rightly too. I mean, I think, criticise this myself. I think I didn't do it right when I was younger. In the boxing world, we worked in a market that was a different market. Today's highly competitive. The fighters are the governors. We don't make a decision about an Anthony Joshua fight unless Anthony Joshua says that's okay. But that's how it should be, and that's how it always should have been. But you can't turn the clock back 20 years. So where it's really changed is the stories. I mean, they've got much better advice now. There's more lawyers. I always criticise lawyers and accountants, and I'm one of them. But they do add that safety valve to, particularly in the fight game, which is a very dangerous game, to make sure that at least these guys are getting properly paid, because that's the only way you can actually justify boxing taking place. It's not the thrill of the fight is great if you're an amateur, but if you're a professional, you do it to make a living. And our job is to maximise those revenues for our client. And that's where it's changed. The client-boxer relationship from the days of going back to Mickey Duff and Jarvis Adair, Harry Solomons, it's entirely, completely different. I mean, stories that you must know about where people would turn up at the arena not even knowing who they were fighting on the same day, not even knowing how much they were going to get, sometimes not even getting it. Today it's a proper business, and I welcome that. I hope we've helped to bring that about, and I know that Eddie is very much in favour of the attitude that the fighters are bosses. And this has happened in a lot of sport, it could be true of cricket, tennis. The trouble is with sport is there's an awful lot of what I call blazers around that love their sport in various sports. They're passionate about their sport, but not necessarily passionate about the talent that participates. And their responsibility is actually to anyone who dedicates their life and makes a difference and also entertains us at a level that we haven't been entertained before. They deserve paying.
Yeah.
Though people say, sport's too much about money. Look, go away. It's still about winning. It's still about what's in your heart. But of course, it's about money, you morons. You've got to get it. These kids are coming from places and they're doing things that we normal humans can't do.
Sure,
Mortals. And they should be paid. So that's the big change in sport. And it's one that I think is actually been a good change and hopefully can benefit generations of future sportsmen and women.
Do you think, though, the mythical nature of the fighters have changed in the sense like, Muhammad Ali, Lewis, Foreman and all that, they couldn't walk down the street. And nowadays, obviously, Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, they're so recognizable. But the rest of the heavyweight division, that's not the case.
I'm not so sure.
Do you think that?
I just think it goes round. It goes round. You'll have periods in sport where there's no real big personalities, what we call personalities, and then you'll have other periods where they are. I think you're slightly wrong on heavyweights. I think Dylan White could walk down the street and get recognised. I think perhaps Joseph Parker, Alexander Usyk. There's only room for a certain number of styles because there's only a certain number of things you can talk about, but the depth is important, and that comes through how many TV shows, how many platforms. How do you build a sportsman? We build them by personality enhancement, by social media, by getting you to know something more about them rather than just what they do in their sport. There's a whole art form to how you make someone famous. And someone like Logan
Paul
has conquered that.
Yeah, no.
What's the art form to make someone famous, Barry?
Work. Every second. Give them an angle. Make sure they're seen. Make sure they're heard. Make sure they're listened to. Give them the platform. Build the platform bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. No sleep. Another program. Another blog. And you know what? Eventually, goodness me, we live in a weird world. People with zero ability become hugely wealthy.
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah, it is.
If you want to make money, being famous is more important than being good. That's a horrible. That's not a good sign, by the way, for the long term.
I tell you what. That's It's true.
That's a good point.
In that thing, I'm a bit of an anorak as well because I spent time on my craft. Do you know what I mean? And now you can just be famous and people don't really care about the craft anymore.
Well, you seem to achieve both. I've got to ask a question now about what you. I think I know the answer, but I'd love to hear it. Of all the sports, and it's hard to say you love them all, right? You love the business of sports promotion. I'm guessing it's boxing or snooker, but like, what one gives you the greatest thrill? And it's not. I bet it's not always about money. Obviously, boxing's got the biggest money by a long way, but what's the favourite for you?
I mean, you're right. I only do things I'm passionate about. I mean, that's my luxury in life. You know, I mean, we can all have nice cars and nice houses, but my luxury is what I do in my time. So, I mean, I love the fishing. I mean, it's crazy, but I look back on it. Obviously, snooker's got a big place in my heart because of 81 and Davis and what's happened with that. You know, Phil Taylor, I managed for 12 years and, just the greatest darts player I've ever seen. Boxing just provides that extra energy on a one night basis, if you like, or one moment basis. Snooker grows over 17 days at the Crucible, unbelievable atmosphere. But boxing, you're sitting there watching AJ versus Klitschko, and I can't tell you, the roller coaster ride emotionally is like, I know my boxing. I said to Eddie, Klitschko shot, this is not really much of a fight. Next thing, AJ knocked him down. I told you so, son. I know all about boxing. Next thing, AJ goes down. I turned around to Eddie and said, have you got the rematch clause? He went, yes. I said, thank Christ for that. And then, Klitschko doesn't push the home his advantage. AJ gets his breath back and dispatches him in brutal fashion. I can't really compare that type of night to too many others,
Truth is, boxing is truly universal.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we can't really say that for, even though I love darts, play darts myself, love snooker.
No, but it's a different thing. Thinking about what a boxer has to do, they're a warrior on their own in that ring.
So I was going to say the same thing. I was going to say truly global, and that adrenaline, the fact that it's a fight, versus, pushing some balls around the, around the cushions. And don't get me wrong, I'm a massive pool guy, snooker guy, I love it. But I feel like, does that add to the, to the excitement, the fact that we're going to see a gladiatorial sport?
Martin, you're getting like an anorak. You've got to be careful. Boy. You've got to be careful. You see, boxing's not that big. This is the thing about it. Boxing, for what goes into boxing and how much excitement it produces, it's not that big. There is a huge amount of growth in boxing. If you want to start talking about numbers, boxing doesn't hit anywhere near the numbers of World Snooker Championships in terms of viewers. It's nowhere near Formula One. It's nowhere near.
Wow, that's surprising.
Because it's so intense, and because it does occasionally produce mega fights. The average world of boxing has got an unbelievable amount of growth left in it in terms of potential subscribers and followers and fans.
Right.
It hasn't even started. I mean, boxing could only dream on Sky of hitting. You could only dream of hitting darts numbers. Doesn't it? I mean,
this is a really good point.
Some overweight guys throwing a dart, and these blokes have trained all their life, and they're putting their life on the risk. That doesn't mean anything. It means the way it's promoted, the way it's projected, and the way it's invested in. And that's when we at Matchroom look at sports. We love boxing, the same as you, Martin, the same as you, Jax. We love it. We love the play. We love the fighters. We love the atmosphere it creates. But we're also businessmen, and we realise there's a massive opportunity in boxing because it's lost its way over the years, and it isn't the global powerhouse it was. Now, perhaps Anthony Joshua or Tyson Fury will develop into a Muhammad Ali. We'll wait and see. The world is a changed place. But what I'm saying is, with the birth of UFC, with the other martial arts events, it shows you boxing has lost its way. Unfortunately, and I'm partly responsible, so I hold my hands up. We've lost its way. It's coming back now because it's got a mastermind at the helm. And the fact he happens to be my son is not me being biased. I'm in awe of what him and his team do. And the team is a big team. I mean, they've got big offices in New York with loads of very clever people. They've got places in Italy. They've got, they're spreading all over the world because they realise this is an opportunity. So we can't even compare boxing as a global sport with any other sport because it's miles and miles behind. But I don't see that as a negative. I see that as a positive because it means we've got fantastic growth ahead of us.
And I know you must be proud to hand over the reins to your son, Eddie, and to see him do such a good job. And some would say he's got more of a gift of gab than you have. But, you know, I'm a new father myself, yeah? And you guys obviously have a great relationship, and I've heard you describe him as a project, like you've built him into what he is, and then he adds that stardust on top. What, as a father, how did you go about doing that? Was just that something that happened naturally, or, you know, how did you go about doing it, man? That's a dream for a lot of dads.
It does happen naturally. I mean, obviously, but you lead by example, don't you? I mean, that's what parenthood is. You try to install certain principles in them, but then at the end of the day, it's up to the kid himself what's inside him. You know, you may want your child to follow different. You know, Eddie was never influenced to follow my career. It's something that he generally wanted, but he'd grown up in that atmosphere and he wanted more. So we can influence, but at the end of the day, that's why we're all unique people, because it's in their own genes how they're going to react to certain situations. Who knows, you know?
You just got the added bonus, Barry, that is going to continue on your legacy, right? You know, because you've come from the same thing, you build it up, and that must be a really wonderful thing. I mean, because the kids, you do your best, and you let them do what they want to do, right?
It's great. Martin, it's great, because when I die, it's not like I'm dying. When I die, it's not like I'm dying, you know, because the children live on, don't they? And if they represent you in a bizarre way, you're still there, aren't you? I mean, isn't that great?
Oh, for sure. Yes, yeah, no, for sure.
No, you've done it, Barry. You've nailed it. Forget the OBE. You nailed life. You did it, bro.